Okay, well, good morning, everybody. We are 10 o'clock and we're going to go ahead and get started with today's training. So thanks to everyone who was able to join so far. It looks like we have just over 40 people on today's call, and that's great. We have actually just over 170 people that registered. It's a very large group of folks that are interested in this event. So really exciting to see such a high number. My name is Amy Jewett, and I am the Invasive Species Coordinator for the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. And I serve as one of the lead administrators of the iMapInvasives program for Pennsylvania. So again, welcome to today's training. In addition to myself, I also have with me on the webinar today, Brian Daggs. He is our invasive species ecologist with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Natural Heritage Program as well. He will be helping to moderate the questions that are coming in during the training today and also at the end. And so with that, just want to mention that throughout the training, if you do have a question that you would like to ask, you're not able to verbally ask that. So please just use the chat or the Q&A boxes that are available here in the Zoom to ask your questions, and Brian will do his best to answer those questions. And then if there's any that we aren't able to answer during the training, we will make sure to get to those at the end. Today's training is going to be recorded. So for anyone who isn't able to join us live today, it will be available later on. And there is going to be a lot of information that's presented today, so you may want to reference the recording later on in order to participate in this event. And I want to mention that my training that I will be using today is in the form of an ArcGIS story map. And so this is a digital presentation that is similar to a website, and everyone will be receiving a link to the story map after today's training. There's a lot of hyperlinks and online resources that are in the story map that you will be able to reference in order to kind of get to know the species a little bit better that are on this year's checklist. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started with today's training. Okay, so just want to mention this is actually the third year that the iMapInvasives program here in Pennsylvania is hosting the Invasive Species Scavenger Hunt. And our program with iMapInvasives is a partnership of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, the Natural Heritage Program in Pennsylvania, and also NatureServe. And funding for our program comes from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So I wanted to kind of kick things off and get folks to, give a little bit of feedback. And I have a few questions that are here on the screen that you can take a look at and take some time and put some answers to these questions in the chat box. So first question, have you participated in this event before? Yes or no? And what was your motivation for signing up? What excites you about this event that you wanted to participate in it? And also, what do you hope to learn by participating as an on-the-ground surveyor and reporter to iMapInvasives? So I'll keep this screen up for just a little bit so you guys have a chance to look those questions over and you can start entering them into the chat box.
Amy, it appears that the chat function is disabled for some people,
okay.
Or perhaps for everyone.
Okay, well then let's use the Q&A. Hopefully that's available for folks to use instead. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll leave these questions up for just a few seconds more. And again, take your time and put your responses in the Q&A. Sorry about the chat not being available. So again, if you participated in this event before, what was your motivation for signing up? And what do you hope to learn by participating as an on-the-ground surveyor and reporter to iMapInvasives? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started into the kind of the heart of our training today. So the purpose of this event, there's several things that we hope to accomplish by hosting this event. So first and foremost, we want to allow you, the folks that are going to be the participants, to learn how to identify more invasive species, maybe some that you're not already familiar with. And this is a way to really kind of dig into some of these species and get to know how to identify them, where the habitats that they generally can be found in, and what are some of the lookalikes to be aware of. So this is all going to be part of today's training and also part of the purpose of this event. Also, by reporting additional data to iMapInvasives, this is going to be useful because iMapInvasives is used by a number of people, including a variety of natural resource professionals across the state who use that information to manage invasive species, to study them, to do research. And so by contributing more data to iMapInvasives, we're helping to further those efforts by those types of individuals. Also, we're helping to allow you as the participants to really start to see in a variety of ways how invasive species are causing harm. And that can be harm to the environment, to the economy, and also to human and animal health. And then finally, one of the species on this year's species checklist is an invasive insect. The scientific name is Lymantria dispar, and the new common name is Spongy Moth. And so that is a new common name for that species. Before it was actually known as gypsy moth. And so by putting it on this year's checklist, we wanted to help raise awareness of the reasons for that name change, and also to be aware of the new name Spongy Moth if you are starting to hear that, but you might not know what it is referencing. So we wanted to include that as well. Okay, so this is just an overview of what you'll need to know in order to participate in this year's event: the who, what, when, where, and why. And so the who is all of you, and what you're going to need is your technology of choice in order to actually go out and conduct your surveys. So to report data to iMapInvasives, you will need some kind of, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, or you want to return back to your home office where you have a desktop or laptop computer available. So you will need some type of technology in order to report your findings. And you're going to be searching for and reporting species, and reporting not only if you're finding the presence of those species, but also if you're looking and not finding those species. And we refer to that as absence information. And so we're going to be having everyone look for all the species on this year's checklist, which I will be showing here in a few moments. And so you'll know what species to look for. And all of your data should be reported to iMapInvasives. And again, I'm going to be going over a little bit more about how to do that. And for any data that you are submitting, make sure that you're including photographs with each of your observation submittals. And that includes not detected information as well. It's helpful to see just a photo of the area or the landscape that you were surveying, and to kind of get a sense of the place where you were when you reported your not detected findings. But of course, for any presence information that you're reporting, we do want to make sure that you're including a photo of the target species that you were looking for and did find. So this event takes place in the month of August. So your surveys can start August 1st, and you can survey up until the end of August on the 31st. So that is your window of time to be conducting your surveys in. You will have till the middle of September, till September 16th, to completely enter all of your presence and absence data into iMapInvasives. Though I would recommend that as you are out and conducting your surveys, that you are submitting your data pretty immediately into iMapInvasives while you're in the field using one of our mobile apps that we have available. We do have 2 mobile apps that can be used to submit data to iMapInvasives. So you have till the middle of September if you want to, maybe jot down some information on a pen and piece of paper and take that back to your home office and enter the data that way. But again, I certainly recommend using one of our mobile apps. That way you can record your data while you're out in the field conducting your surveys. So the where of where are you going to be conducting your surveys? We certainly are encouraging people to go out mostly in natural areas to conduct your surveys. So places like public parks and forests. And we do have a few aquatic species on this year's list. And so you're going to want to visit some water bodies as well, like ponds, lakes, and rivers. Some of the species on the checklist can be looked for in any place. We do have a few, at least one insect and one animal. And so if you choose to survey on your own property, you can do that. And if you want to survey on someone else's property that maybe is private, you do want to make sure that you're getting permission from that landowner first to conduct your surveys and also to then record your findings in the public database that we're using, which is iMapInvasives. So, why are we doing this? Again, we talked about some of the reasons and the purposes of this event to help raise awareness of the harm being caused by invasive species, and of course the impacts that they have to our native species and our habitats, and how that ultimately really does affect our state's economy. And so by finding and reporting these species to iMapInvasives, we are helping to, again, contribute to this central online clearinghouse, which is used by a variety of people for a variety of purposes. But ultimately, it really is helping to better inform our understanding of the distributions of these species, and to help to also inform any future management efforts that may be occurring for them. And then finally, there is prizes that are available. This year, we will be giving away a prize bundle of outdoor related items to 5 lucky participants. And that drawing will happen randomly. And there is information at the throughout my training that I'll be talking about that you'll need to know in order to qualify as a prize winner. But 5 lucky people will be getting some prizes as part of this event. Okay, so if you don't already have an iMapInvasives login account, you will need to request one in order to participate in this event. And the login account is free, so you don't need to pay in order to be a part of this system. So in order to sign up for an account, if you don't already have one, you'll want to go to paimapinvasives.org. And in the upper right part of the website, you'll see a login or register button. You can click on either of those and it will take you to a form that looks like this. And you'll want to fill that in. You'll then get an email right afterwards asking you to confirm your new account. And so you'll want to make sure that you look for that email and confirm your new account in order to be properly registered in the system. If you do already have an iMapInvasives account, but maybe you haven't logged in for a little while and you forget your password, if you go to the same form, you'll see an area in the top where you can sign into iMapInvasives. There is a forgot password hyperlink that you can click on that will allow you to go through a few prompts in order to then reset your password if you need to do that. Okay, so let's jump into this year's species list. So all the species on this year's checklist are species that are known to be invasive in Pennsylvania, and many are invasive in other places that are nearby in the Mid-Atlantic region. So it's not just Pennsylvania that's being impacted by some of these. Some of the species on this year's checklist are have not actually been found in Pennsylvania before, or have newly arrived. And so these species are referred to as early detection species. We do have several other species that are considered high priority based on the harm that they cause and also their rarity in the state. So some species are not commonly found. And then several plants on this year's checklist are actually Pennsylvania noxious weeds. And so those are definitely ones that we know to be troublesome and ones that we want to get a better handle on as far as their distribution in the state. So we have a few categories. So the first category here for our checklist is terrestrial plants. So we have mile-a-minute vine, Japanese and European barberry, Japanese giant and Bohemian knotweed, and common and glossy buckthorn. And so for some of these, you notice that we have actually 2 species in some of these categories where we talk about barberry and knotweed and buckthorn. So you can choose to just survey for one of these in each of these categories. You don't have to survey for both. Though certainly, if you would like to, you can. But just keep in mind where it says survey for at least one, it's just saying you don't need to survey, for example, for both Japanese and European barberry, you can just survey for one. Then we do have several aquatic plants on our list this year as well. We have large flower primrose willow, and there's two kinds of the primrose willows here. So again, you only need to survey for one. We also have Carolina fanwort, pink lotus, and water chestnut. And then finally, we do have a few animal species. We have jumping worms and spongy moth. And this photo here that you see here is a photo of the spongy moths and their egg sacs or their egg masses. Okay, so I wanted to show some information that was pulled from iMapInvasives as far as the distribution of the species on this year's checklist. So you can get a better understanding of how common or rare some of these species are and where they've already been found. And so again, that is one of the primary uses of iMapInvasives, is to be able to compile all of this distribution data for various invasive species into one place so we can have that better understanding of their distributions across the Commonwealth. But certainly iMapInvasives doesn't have data for, we don't have, all the data for a certain species. We're continuing to compile that information as our database grows and our usership grows as well. And so I certainly always recommend checking out other data sources as well, so you can really get a more accurate picture of a species distribution. So some additional databases that you can check out in addition to looking at iMapInvasives include EdMaps, iNaturalist, the Biota of North America program, and also the USGS Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database. So I do want to go through though and show you some of the distributions for these species so you can get a better handle on that. So again, this data that you're seeing here on this map here with the red dots is being pulled from iMapInvasives. So this is the current known distribution for a mile a minute. Here is Japanese barberry. As you can see, it is very, very widespread across the state. European barberry, which is not quite as widespread as Japanese barberry is. This is a map that's inclusive of all three knotweed species. So that includes Japanese knotweed, giant knotweed, and Bohemian knotweed. And Bohemian knotweed is a hybrid between Japanese and giant knotweed. Here's a distribution map for common buckthorn. And here's the map for glossy buckthorn. And this map is inclusive of only the large flower primrose willow, Ludwigia Grandiflora. As you can see, it is fairly rare in the state. Currently, we do not have any data in IMAP for Ludwigia Grandiflora subspecies hexapetala. And so that is one that may be present in the state, but we just don't have any data for it currently. Here's a map for Carolina fanwort. As you can see, this one also is fairly rare in Pennsylvania. And this map is blank. This is because pink lotus has not yet been found in Pennsylvania. But one of the reasons we included it on this year's checklist is because we want to make sure that folks are aware of this and other early detection species so that we know to be looking for them. So in case we do find pink lotus somewhere in Pennsylvania, that would be a red flag to say we need to find this and we need to manage it as quickly as possible so that it doesn't spread further across the state. So if we do find any pink lotus in Pennsylvania, it will be a very notable finding. Okay, here's a map for water chestnut. Again, this is another species that is fairly rare in the state, although eastern Pennsylvania does have the bulk of the distribution for this species currently. This is a map for jumping worms. This map is likely not as accurate as it could be simply because we are really starting to get a lot more reports for jumping worms across the states, and more people are starting to know about them and then knowing that they should report their findings. So I have a feeling that jumping worms are actually more prevalent in Pennsylvania than what this map is showing currently. And then finally, this is a map from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources showing the egg mass survey that was done for spongy moth across Pennsylvania. So you can see that much of north central Pennsylvania is really being hit very hard by this particular species. And certainly every county in the state is impacted by spongy moth, but certainly we can see some areas where it is really being heavily impacted by. Okay, so those are our species distributions. Again, you'll be able to take a look at those and all the other information in the story map after today's training, because everyone who registered will be getting a link to this story map. So you can go back and reference that information at any time. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you choose to participate in this event and be an on-the-ground surveyor, you will need to be reporting your presence and absence findings to iMapInvasives. And we do have a few options for reporting your data to iMapInvasives. Again, I mentioned we have 2 mobile apps. One we call the classic iMapInvasives mobile app. And then we also have, we use Survey123, which is able to have data be entered into iMapInvasives by using a special data collection form that you include into Survey123. And then also we have the iMapInvasives online platform, which is available on any device, whether you want to use that on a computer, like a desktop or laptop, or even on a smartphone or a tablet. But in order to submit any data using any of these 3 options, you will need to first request a free login account, which we've already talked about how to do that. I also want to mention, because sometimes this can be confusing for some folks. So once you have downloaded either of the apps onto your device of choice, you do not need Wi-Fi or cell reception in order to use them. So you can be in the middle of nowhere and these apps will still function just fine. But I do want to mention that in order to actually upload data from the apps into iMapInvasives, you will need to be in an area that does have an internet connection. So again, keep in mind, to use the apps, you don't need an internet connection, but to upload the data that you're collecting with them, you will need to be somewhere that has Wi-Fi. So because I want to make sure we get through all the information in today's training, I'm probably not going to have time to go through and actually show you guys these recorded trainings on how to use the mobile apps, but they are available online on YouTube and you can go and watch them at any time. They provide all the details that you need to know in order to use either of the apps. And so here's one on how to use the classic app that I put together, and Brian Deggs put together a video on how to use Survey123. We do also have a video on how to use the online interface, and that is also available on YouTube and accessible here within the story map. So I included this table because I wanted to make sure that folks are kind of understanding, which might be the best option for you to use in order to collect the data that you are going to be collecting out in the field. So before you actually start your surveys, figure out what the best option for you. And so this table is showing that you can collect presence and not detected records with all 3 of these data collection options, either of the apps and also our online interface for iMapInvasives. You guys won't need to be collecting any treatment data for this particular event, so you don't necessarily need to have that as a consideration. But we do not have the ability to collect lines and polygons with the classic mobile app. It can only collect point data. And so if you're in an area where, for example, you see a very large knotweed patch and you want to show, the boundary of how large that patch actually was, you would need to use either Survey123 or the IMAP online interface in order to draw a polygon representing that large area that you're finding that species at. Now, certainly you could represent that with a point as well, and that would be fine. There's no right or wrong way necessarily to collect the data. But if you want to be more detailed and say, well, I know this is a very large area that has this knotweed, and I want to represent it that way in IMAP as a polygon, then you would need either Survey 123 or the online interface in order to do that. As I mentioned, both of the mobile apps can be used without being in connectivity, without having that internet connection. But if you do want to use the online IMAP interface, you will need to have an internet connection in order to use that. The data upload process into IMAP is immediate with the classic mobile app and the online interface. Survey 123 will happen every hour. So when you submit your data, it'll take about an hour to get loaded into iMapInvasives. And then with all of these different data collection options, the confirmation process happens by an iMapInvasives administrator in conjunction with an expert who is able to help to identify a species. And currently we work with over 50 experts from across the state who are able to help us review the species IDs for the records that are received and to hopefully be able to confirm them in the database. So I've mentioned a few times already about reporting absence data. And maybe some people are wondering, what is the purpose of that and why would that be valuable? And so for a lot of people, especially our natural resource professionals that use iMapInvasives, absence data is a way to show that a particular area was searched and a particular target species was not found there. Now, certainly it's really difficult to confirm not detected data because we're not also going out into the field and visiting these locations and saying, yes, water chestnut definitely wasn't found here, for example. But it is a way to just say that someone, who was, trained in looking at this species, looked for it and didn't find it, essentially. And so perhaps if a few years go down the road and then, a point gets listed on the map saying that a species was found there, that's a way for us to say, hey, maybe this is actually a very new finding because we can see that absence data was reported there previously for that species. Also, in terms of being helpful to me as the administrator and the coordinator of this particular event, having not detected data in combination with presence data is a really great way to get a visual perspective of where all of you as the scavenger hunt participants are actually conducting your surveys across the state. And so, for example, if you only found 2 species on the checklist and you only reported presence data for those 2 species, it would be really hard to know where you conducted your surveys for the other species. But by reporting you're not detected or your absence data to IMAP, that's a really good way to be able to see all the places that you're visiting to conduct your surveys at. Okay, so this is something that I wanted to make sure I included in the training today because a lot of people will come back later and say, hey, I contributed my findings to iMapInvasives, but now I don't know how to actually go in and look at them. And so it's really easy to do that. No matter what data collection method you use, whether it's an app or the online interface, you're going to go into the online interface to actually find the data that you have submitted. Just note that both of the mobile apps are not used to view data that's already been submitted. They're only data collection tools. So the online interface is the way that you would actually look at the data that you've already submitted. So in order to do that, you would need to log into the platform. And then on the top row of the map that you'll see, there's a button that says Filter Records. And on that little box that pops up, you'll see a section that says Filter on Your Records. And there's a little toggle that you can toggle on. Toggle that switch on, and then you would say Apply Filter once you've done that. Before you're actually looking at the map to start seeing your data show up after clicking on Apply Filter, you want to make sure you go into the section of IMAP that's called Layers On Off, which is on the far right side of the screen. And I know it's a little cut off here on my screen right now. You can sort of see a little bit of it. But those are essentially the mapping layers that you're telling IMAP to turn on when you're conducting a query or a species filter of some sort. So you do want to make sure that you turn on the confirmed, unconfirmed, approximate, and not detected layers to make sure that all of your data is showing up when you're doing that particular query. And then from there, you can zoom in on the map and get a closer view of your data. And just for reference, our presence data is set so that you're looking at orange hexagons on the map at a more zoomed out view. But as you zoom in closer on the map, those orange hexagons will actually turn into specific points, lines, or polygons. And you can click on any of those records to then bring up the record details that are associated with it. And if you need to make any changes to your records once you've already submitted them to iMapInvasives, you are able to do that as long as your record is still listed as unconfirmed. Once that record is confirmed, you are not going to be able to make any additional changes to it unless you would reach out to me or another iMapInvasives administrator and ask that those changes be made. So again, keep in mind, you can make changes as long as your record is still listed as unconfirmed. Okay, so I do want to mention here, this is true for this event, and this is true for using iMapInvasives in general, even outside of the scavenger hunt. And that is that photography matters. So when you are reporting your findings to iMapInvasives, primarily for presence data, make sure that you are keeping the following things in mind. And so just in general, you know, this is talking about taking really good pictures, because that is really critical in order to confirm any records that come into the database. So you want to make sure that you are really close to that target species. For most species, I basically say you're within arm's reach of that species. You can reach out and touch it if you needed to. And that is to ensure that you are capturing the distinguishing characteristics of that species. If you are too far away from a species, if you are like, 15, 20 feet away from a particular species, like a tree, for example, you might be able to see the tree, but you're not going to be able to see the distinguishing characteristics of that tree. And that's what's needed in order to confirm your records. So make sure that you are really up close and personal with the species that you're photographing. You want to make sure that your camera is focused on the target species and not on the background vegetation. Sometimes that can happen where your camera's focus can get a little off and you may not realize it until after you've taken the picture. So make sure you're just kind of slowing down, making sure that your camera is focused on what you want it to be focused on, and taking a really good picture that way. You also want to make sure that your photo is clear and crisp and is not blurry or fuzzy. Over the many years that I've been in this role, I've seen so many pictures that are just not, very well done, and I really can't see the distinguishing characteristics of a species because a picture is fairly blurry. So make sure that you're taking very clear and crisp images. Again, as I mentioned, avoid taking photos from a distance at all possible, except if you're including multiple images in a record. And so, for example, if you're taking several images, for one presence record, it's fine to include a photograph that's taken from a distance, but you do want to make sure that you're including other photos that are taken pretty up close. And I do want to mention as well, in relation to that, currently the iMapInvasives classic mobile app is limited to only taking one photo per record when you're creating a record using the classic mobile app. So keep that in mind. If you are using the classic mobile app, you really can only include one photo with each record that you're creating with it. So that needs to be a really good up close photo that we can use in order to confirm your record. Now, just keep in mind that you can add data into IMAP from the classic mobile app and then add additional images to that record once it's in the online interface. So I think it's up to at least 5 images that you can add. But when you're actually creating data with that classic mobile app, that's where you're a little limited to just having one photo per record currently. We are hoping to change that in the future, but that's the way it works right now. If you are using Survey 123 or the IMAP online interface to collect and record your data, there is more images that you're able to add at one time for each presence record. So for survey 123, I believe it's at least 5 images that you can include, and the same is true for the online interface. So just want to make sure I mention that. Okay, going back up to my other list of things to keep in mind for when you're collecting presence data. So when possible, try to include something that will help to show the scale or the size of the species that you are photographing. So that can be something like your hand that you include in that image, a coin, a ruler, anything that you can kind of get a sense of how big something is based on having that other image in, or other thing in the picture. And as I mentioned several times already, again, it's really important that you're capturing those distinguishing characteristics of the species that you're observing. And a little bit later here in my training, there's a section called homework, which you can probably guess what that means. It's going to be all the things that you'll need to review after today's training. That section of the training today has all the information you're going to need to get to know each of these species better. What are their specific characteristics that say this species really is jumping worms, for example? You know, all of that is laid out so that you'll be able to get to know these species better. And then I mentioned before, but I just want to say here again, if you are reporting not detected or absence data, it's still really helpful to take a photo that you include with that not detected record of the area that you're surveying, the landscape, or just essentially wherever you're standing. Just take a picture of the area where you're at and include that with your record, because that's really helpful to just kind of say, oh, okay, this is where this person was when they made this not detected record. And so make sure that you're trying to include those types of photos with your not detected data as well. So I have a few examples here that I wanted to show you as far as some good photos and what to strive for when you're taking your photographs for this event, and also some photos that aren't as good. So here's a photo of giant knotweed. You can see this photo was taken up close. It's very clear and crisp. We can see the distinguishing characteristics that are needed for identification, which again, you'll learn more about that in the homework section of this training. You also see this person included their hand or part of their hand in the photo. And that's really important, especially for giant knotweed, because it's really valuable to know the size of the leaf in order to actually confirm this species. That's one of the characteristics that we look for. So this is a really great photo. Here's another really good photo. You can see this is some aquatic vegetation that someone was surveying for. And rather than actually just taking a photo of the species in the water body, they took it out of the water body. They had a separate kind of pan that they filled up with some clear water. They put the vegetation in there so it could float, so we can really see the leaflets and be able to count the leaflets of that vegetation very easily. That's very important when you're trying to identify aquatic vegetation, is counting the number of leaflets that you see on there. You can see this person also included a ruler here as well. Again, that's another really important scale object to include so that we can get a better sense of how long this vegetation is. So again, this is a really good image to take. And then here's the other image that you see here. This is jumping worms. Again, this is a really up close, clear and crisp image. It's showing the distinguishing characteristics that we need to see, which is the clitellum here on this worm. So that is really important to make sure we're getting a good, clear, crisp image of when photographing jumping worms. Here's a few images that are not so good. So we can see that this photo is taken pretty far away from the observed species, which is purple loosestrife. So I can see there's a purple flower in the distance, but more than that, I'm not able to really know for sure if this is purple loosestrife or perhaps a native or exotic lookalike. So this photo would not be usable in order to confirm a record. It would be fine to include if you're putting in other images in your record that are more up close and showing the characteristics of that species. But this photo by itself would not be able to be used to confirm your record. Here's a photo of Mila-minute vine. Probably we would be able to use this image to confirm this species because it's showing enough distinguishing characteristics that we would be able to determine that this is indeed Mila-minute. but you can see that the person's camera was focused on the background vegetation rather than the target species here in the front. So this is really important, again, to just slow down, make sure that your camera is focused on the target species, and that's the photo that you're taking rather than something like this that's a little bit more blurry or fuzzy. Okay, so very important piece of information here. So we do have a project that is set up in iMapInvasives. It's called the Invasive Species Scavenger Hunt 2022. And this is a project that for any data, whether it's presence or absence data that you're submitting, you want to make sure that you are tagging your data to that project. And that can be done whether you're recording data with an app or with the online interface. Again, the videos that I mentioned a little bit earlier that are available on YouTube have that information on how to tag your records to this project. So just for reference, here's how to actually, get to the project page for this in iMapInvasives and how to make sure that you are requesting that you can be a member in this project, because you will need to make that request in order to actually be able to tag your data to this project. So if you log into iMapInvasives, click on the upper left corner menu, which is up here, and choose projects from that menu. There'll be a search box that you can type in Invasive Species Scavenger Hunt 2022. And this is the page that will then appear, that you will see that scavenger hunt profile page. In the upper right-hand corner of that page, you'll see a hyperlink that says request to join project. If you click on that link, it will send a link to me that I will then make sure that I approve you as a member of that project. And I will make sure to do that as soon as I can. You should receive an email notification afterwards letting you know that you are then a member of this project. Just to note, if you are already an existing iMapInvasives registered user, you've already been added as a member of this project. So you won't need to request to be a member of this project. It's already been done for you because you are already a registered user. So for anyone who doesn't already have a login account, you will need to go through this process and make sure that you're requesting to be part of the project. But you can double check to make sure that you are already a member of the project by going into your account. Again, accessing the main iMapInvasives menu, choosing your account, and then looking in the project section of your account in order to make sure that it's listed there. If there's any questions about that afterwards, if any of that is confusing, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to clarify anything that may be needed. Okay, so let's get to more details and talk a little bit more about the prizes that are going to be given out to some folks that participate in this event. So again, this event is actually going to start August 1st and it will go till August 31st. That is your window of time that you will have to do your surveys for the species on this year's checklist. You will have until September 16th to enter any of your presence absence data into iMapInvasives. Again, I recommend doing that immediately while you're in the field using one of the mobile apps, as that's generally the easiest way to do it. But you will have some time after August ends to still be able to add your data into IMAP if you need to. Again, make sure you're tagging all of your data, whether it's presence or absence, to that Invasive Species Scavenger Hunt 2022 project in iMapInvasives. Okay, that's really important to do that. So after the September 16th, which will be the cutoff for adding your data into the program, we will be compiling all of that data into an analysis to say, here's all the data that came into the database from this event. Here's any notable findings, that sort of information that'll be really nice to kind of get a good handle on once the event is over. And that analysis will be sent out to all of you, all of the participants of this event, probably sometime this winter or next spring, depending on how long it takes to compile all that information. Okay, so then at the end of September, September 30th, that will be when the 5 winners of this event will be selected and announced. Again, that will be done by random drawing. So in order to qualify as a prize winner, you'll need to complete the following 2 tasks. So you'll need to enter at least 1 presence or absence record into iMapInvasives for each of the species on this year's checklist, and that'll be based on findings from your field surveys that you conduct. Keep in mind, there are a few categories of species that you only actually need to survey for one. So there's a few species of barberry, knotweed, buckthorn, and water primrose. So you only actually need to survey for and report on one of those in order to qualify. And then you also need to make sure that you're tagging all of your data to that project. If it's not tagged to the project, we won't know that it's associated with this event. And so again, it's really important to make sure that you're tagging your data to that project, also then to qualify as a prize winner. So just to note, you do not need to submit any presence data at all in order to qualify as a prize winner. You know, you're not guaranteed to see any of these species depending on where you survey at. And so that's okay, as long as you're going out and you are conducting your surveys and looking for these species, and you've done your homework ahead of time to know what to look for and how to identify these species. That is really the most important part of this event. Again, trying to help boost your knowledge and awareness of these species, where they're found, how to identify them, and some of their lookalikes. So the prize package for 5 individuals will include the following items. So we have a Ozark Trail river tube that you can go inner tubing with. We have a stainless steel beverage tumbler, an invasive species field guide, and also a gift card to Public Lands, which is a store that has a lot of really nice outdoor related equipment and gear. So again, what prize winners for this event will be selected at the end of September. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so this is the homework section. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but I do just want to go through it so that you see how it's set up and how you can make sure that you're learning about each of the species that are on this year's checklist. I would recommend that after today's training, as you're going through this homework section, be sure to just pace yourself. There's a lot of information here to look at. If you're not familiar with some of these species, don't try to hurry through this. Again, one of the main purposes of this event is so that each of you can get to know these species better. So that you can say, for example, at the end of this event, I know exactly what mile a minute vine is. I know where it's found. I know some of its lookalikes and that type of thing. That's really the most important part. So take your time as you go through this information. So for each section here, we have the species that are listed on this year's checklist. We have the common name listed here at the top. We have the scientific name listed right underneath of it. We have the status listed for the species in Pennsylvania. As I mentioned, many of the plants on this year's checklist are actually noxious weeds. And so you can click on this link here where you can actually view the full list of noxious weeds in Pennsylvania. And I'll click on that here so we can you can see where that takes you. So here that takes you to the Department of Agriculture's website. And you can go down here and see the full listing of all the species that are currently listed as noxious in our state. Then we have another section called Identification Tips and Harm Caused. And these links will take you to resources that are currently available online that will help you learn how to identify this species and also learn about the harm that it causes to the environment, to the economy, and to human and animal health. Also, for some species, there were some really great videos that were available online. And so I included some of those videos here. So I would recommend taking a look at those. Also, for most of these species, they do have lookalikes. So you want to make sure that you are aware of other species that may look like, for example, mile a minute. And you know not to confuse these species with mile a minute when reporting your findings. And I will mention that you don't necessarily need to be a botanical or any kind of other species expert when you are reporting your data to iMapInvasives. If you are not completely sure what something is, take your best guess. Again, any data that gets submitted to iMapInvasives is going to be QC'd or quality control checked by an expert. And so someone else is going to be looking at your data prior to it being confirmed in the platform. So if you're not sure that something is mile a minute, go ahead and just list it as mile a minute anyway. And that way, you know, you take in your best guess and from there it will go through the QC process. Okay, so also listed in this section is the preferred habitat for this species. So you generally know the types of areas you want to be in when you are surveying for it. And that's going to vary depending on some of these species. And then there's also a notes section. For some of these, this is going to be describing how to tell the difference between that species and some of its lookalikes. Some of the other notes sections will have some other information as well. And then we do have at least one of the videos listed here right in the story map that again is listed up here in this section. So you can watch it right from the story map, or you can click on any of these links and it will take you to those resources. And then there's also some images of that species right here in the section as well. So you can get a really good sense pretty quickly of what species we're referring to. Okay, and that's true for all of the species on the checklist. We have that information here for all of them. So again, I'm just going to scroll through so that you can see that and then remember that after today's training. So here's some information for Japanese and European barberry. We have the video and we have some images here. We have information for Japanese giant and Bohemian knotweed. We have a video and we have some images here. I really liked this photo and I really wanted to include it here in the training because it's a really great comparison of how to tell the difference between the different types of knotweed. Then we have Comet and Glossy Buckthorn. So we have a video on that and also some images for you to get a better handle on how to tell the difference between the two. And then we have large flower primrose willows. Again, there's two species in this category, Ludwigia Grandiflora and Ludwigia Grandiflora subspecies expetala. And I do want to mention the differences between these two species are very subtle. And I will be completely honest and say I am not even the best person to be able to tell the difference between them myself. So if you find something that looks like this species, again, take your best guess, do your best to determine the identification. And when you submit it to IMAP, we will make sure to have someone QC that data. We do that for all of our data. But especially for something like this, where it's fairly rare in the state, and we want to make sure we're getting that identification accurate, we will make sure to have an expert QC that data. Okay, then we have Carolina fanworts. Okay, we have a video here. We have some images of that species. Then we have pink lotus. Again, if you'll remember, this is the species that has not been found in Pennsylvania to date, as far as we know. So if you are finding this species, it will be very, very notable and something that we will be notifying a lot of people about very quickly to make sure that we're getting this species managed if it's found. Then we have water chestnut. Here's some images of water chestnut. Some things to look for in addition to the plant itself are the nutlets. So the nutlets on water chestnut, when they are still attached to the plant and viable, are green in color. Sometimes people will find the nutlets after they are not attached anymore and they are then floating on the water surface and they're this black color. These are actually non-viable nutlets at this point, but still really important information to report because it may suggest that a water chestnut population is within a particular area, even if you aren't actually finding the plant itself. So these are all things to look for and potentially report to IMAP if you're finding. Okay, then we have information on jumping worms. This has been in the media for some time now, so I did include some news media information for you guys to check out. Here's again a video that was put together and some images. So this image, I just want to clarify here in the center, there aren't any worms that I can see in this image, but what we do see is soil that resembles coffee grounds. And this is a clear indicator that jumping worms are in an area when the soil looks like this. And this is actually really bad. This is one of the consequences that come from a jumping worm infestation because this type of soil is really hard for a lot of plants to grow in. And it also is something that will then promote soil erosion. And so if you see soil that looks like coffee grounds, you may very likely have a jumping worm infestation. And then finally, we have information on spongy moth. Again, there's information in this section about the recent name change for this one and the reasons for that name change. Okay, and so then we have the life cycle here. So just want to point out that right now we're at the end of July going into August. So the life cycle, or the part of the spongy moth that you will likely see right now, are the adults. Here's the female and here's the male, and also the egg masses. You will likely not be seeing anything in the caterpillar stage right now, or the pupa. So this is the part of spongy moth that you're going to be looking for currently. Here's a video that I included from the Game Commission, some of the spraying that they're doing as part of their program to control spongy moth. And that's in addition to the work that the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has also been doing for quite some time now. And here's some images of spongy moth. Finally, I included in here some nice quotes that we got from a few participants last year. And some of the things that they appreciated and they gained from participating in the scavenger hunt. And so I included that here in case folks wanted to take a look at those quotes as well. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up the training that I've got for you all today. So it looks like we have a few moments left. I'd be happy to answer any questions that Brian wasn't already able to get to for folks. And then if folks have any additional questions, you can feel free to put them in the Q&A, and Brian and I will do our best to answer them. So Brian, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you, and you can moderate the Q&A, please.
Okay. Yeah, there were a few questions that popped up during the webinar that I was able to answer. I see one that just popped in right now, though. Can we get photos from others and locations to submit?
Okay, hold on a second. Let me make sure I'm understanding that question.
I believe they're asking, can they field data from other people who might not be a participant and then submit that to iMapInvasives?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, please correct me if I'm interpreting your question wrong, by the way.
Can we get photos from others and locations to submit? Yeah, so I would say, well, first and foremost, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is if someone else is finding a species and taking a photo of it, encourage them to be part of this project, part of this event. That way they can submit the data themselves. But certainly if they are not interested in doing that, feel free to take that information and add it into iMapInvasives, and maybe just mention, who the original observer was, since it'll be getting listed under your name when you're logged into iMapInvasives. Hopefully that answers that question well.
Okay. Do we have a link to the recordings of this and other training sessions? Will there be a link for this recording as well as past trainings?
Yes, so there will be a link to a recording that will be sent out from today's training afterwards, maybe even as soon as this afternoon, but for sure I will be sending everything out tomorrow if I can't do it today. So again, that'll include a link to the recording. That will also include a link to this story map, which was the training that I just went through here today, that has all of the links and resources that folks will be using, especially that that's in the homework section. So those will be sent out to everyone. If you need additional resources past that, feel free to reach out to me and let me know what other resources you need, and I'll be happy to work with you.
Okay. Can we submit data from anywhere in the state of Pennsylvania?
Yes. Yep. This is a event that is statewide, so you can be anywhere in Pennsylvania and you can be reporting data. So yes, that is encouraged. And you don't need to survey, just in one location. You can go to multiple locations and submit multiple findings for water chestnut, for example, or whatever it is, so you can make as many presence and absence records as you like. If you're going on vacation somewhere and want to do surveys, or if you just want to stay close to home and conduct your surveys that way, that's fine. So again, in order to qualify as a prize winner, you will need to report at least one presence or one absence record for each of the species on this year's checklist. So just keep that in mind.
All right. If others are interested, and I assume that means interested in this event, how can they get trained after this morning, after our webinar is concluded, if they have not been
Yeah.
able to be here today?
Sure. So because everyone who is registered will be receiving a link to the recording, feel free to pass that link to the recording on to those individuals, or you can just have that person reach out to me directly through email, and I will be happy to provide the resources to them, like this recording and the story map, in order for them to participate. And that should be all that they need to then get started. And I will mention too that, you know, again, we have the whole month of August to conduct the surveys in, and maybe someone doesn't learn about this event until the last week in August. They still can participate. Now they're going to have a limited time to do so because you have to do your surveys in the month of August. And when September comes around, you know, your surveys don't count anymore towards this event. So certainly you can, you know, report data to iMapInvasives at any time, but for this particular event, you'll want to make sure that you're doing your surveys in the month of August. So again, that recording that I'll be sending a link out to, and then the link to the story map are the things that folks will need if they weren't able to participate in the session here today.
Okay. A question from the middle of the seminar that I would like to bring up. Are the invasives you listed the only ones we are to be recording? Can we record others into iMapInvasives as additional work?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. Feel free to report any invasive species that you are finding out in the field. For purposes of this event, I'm only asking folks to survey for a limited number of species because, as many of you know, there are a lot of invasives in Pennsylvania. And so it's very overwhelming to, you know, just think about having to go out and report everything. So we really wanted to help to kind of lessen the load for people. And that's why we put together a specific checklist just for this event. But as I mentioned, it's really valuable if you want to report other invasive species that you're finding out in the field and report that data to IMAP. So please feel free to do that as well if you would like to.
Will you email us all the links in the homework?
I will not be emailing the links in the homework. I will be emailing the link to this story map, which then will be able to be opened by any of you, and that you can access the links for yourself. So once I email the link to the story map, you'll have everything you need as far as all the resources that I was showing here today.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is a question. You might need to rephrase this, but it might be asking, do you need to retrieve IMAP lists to get the Scavenger Hunt 2020 on your mobile device?
Okay, I think I know what this means. Okay, so yeah, and this will probably be a little bit more clear once people watch the training for how to use the classic mobile app. Yeah, so when you are using the classic mobile app or the basic mobile app, as we sometimes refer to it as, you want to make sure that you're first setting up your preferences in that app. Again, that YouTube video will walk you through how to do that. So in case it's a little confusing what I mean by that, make sure you're watching that video and you'll have all of your questions answered. But part of setting up your preferences, there's a button in there that says retrieve IMAP lists. And what that does is that pulls in the most up-to-date species list that we have in iMapInvasives. It also pulls in all the information from your user profile in iMapInvasives. So you want to make sure that prior to setting up and using the mobile app, you are already a member of this project, the Scavenger Hunt 2022 project that's listed in your account, and your affiliated organization and anything else that you want to make sure is listed there. Once that is listed in your user profile in iMapInvasives online, that will then be able to be retrieved or pulled into your classic mobile app when you're setting up your preferences. And that will then allow you to tag any of your data to that project by using that particular app. I know that can be sometimes a little confusing for folks, and so hopefully that explanation made sense. If there's any questions or if you're having trouble, having the project or anything else show up properly in your mobile app for the Classic app, feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you as needed.
Okay. I guess last call for any more questions. I haven't seen anything new come in, so if you have any other questions to ask, now's the time to put them in.
Thank you, Brian. And I would also mention I have my email up here on the screen. If folks want to email me after today's training with any questions that they have, feel free to do that. My email is ajewett@paconserve.org. That's my preferred way of communication, but you can also reach out to me through my office phone, which is 412-586-2305. So again, after today's training, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. And I guess we'll kind of wrap things up from here. So I would just say a final thank you to everyone who was able to be on today's training. Thank you for your questions and your feedback and answering the questions that we posted there at the beginning. Really appreciate it. And I would say good luck to all of you with your surveys once August rolls around. And I'll be trying to send out periodic emails as updates to the event and where things stand. So again, feel free to reach out and stay up to date that way. And yeah, reach out with any other questions you have. So thank you, everyone. And probably will be in touch with you all very soon. So take care.